So are these, just to verify, you're looking at the like Kubernetes.github.io?
Yes, correct. The internal documentation, not the stuff that might be on the other document repo.
So I think we have broadly 3 classes of docs that we need to pay attention to. One is like end user facing docs. How do you use Kubernetes and includes cluster administrators? One is more task focused docs, like so you want to change your plugin, here's why you might want to do that and here's how to do it. And then the third that we've under-serviced is specifications. And I threw this on the agenda for 2017. I'd like to see us crystallize a lot of what we're doing in the form of better specification. And the 3 that I picked on in the doc were one for the DNS spec, which is actually already being contributed through a community. One being the, like, what does it actually mean to replace kube proxy? So what is the services abstraction really? And one being what is the actual expectation of pod networking? We've sort of hand-waved about that for a long time. We know that folks like Mike are doing interesting things with health checking that sort of falls outside the norm of what most of us are doing. I would like to crystallize that in a spec in early 2017 so that we can tell people that we've at least put thought into these things.
When you say spec, Tim, what kind of format do you mean?
I mean a doc with precise language and defining the bounds, and anything outside those bounds is being fair game.
Okay. So not quite the same as the proposal stuff that we've done before for network policy.
Yeah, I'd like to have something a little bit more formal and a little bit more widely publishable, something that doesn't exist in a directory called proposal.
Right, and also the proposals aren't maintained, right? We want docs that are maintained as the design changes.
There you go. So I know that specs, while they may be the most fun to write, are not the most useful docs that we need to write. Like we really do have to service our end users and cluster administrators.
I think you said that backwards. They are very useful, even though they might not be fun to write.
Oh, I enjoy writing specs, don't you?
I actually kind of do.
I do.
But I, as you noted, I kind of would really like to be able to read one too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm assuming, maybe falsely, but I'm assuming that this is our last SIG Network meeting for the year, and that we'll regroup sometime in early to mid-January. Do we want to start doing task assignment today, or should we leave that until early January when we can have a little bit more detailed breakdown of the docs that we think need work?
Before we do that, Tim, there is an item last on the agenda, which I think Casey put on there, which is, should we cancel the 12/29 meeting? And I personally would have no problem with that. Is there general agreement from the SIG that we should not meet on the 29th? Anybody dying to meet on the 29th?
I'm not going to be around that day, so cancel it.
You're ruining my plans for the New Year holiday, guys, by canceling it. I was planning on.
I was really hoping to raise a toast with y'all, but I guess I won't be able to.
All right. Given that there's no strenuous objections to not having the meeting on the 29th, let's just go ahead and cancel that. Just wanted to clear that up, Tim, and make sure that we got that out of the way.
Great.
All right.
So I'd propose, given that we have a lot of stuff on the agenda for today, that we push to the first meeting of the new year, the documentation, and we come into that with a list of the docs. Like, let's actually go through and reread the docs with fresh eyes and see what we think about them, and come in and make that maybe the sole item on the agenda for the first meeting of the state of the docs and who's going to take them and fix them. Maybe we can even get one of our docs people to attend and tell us how they would like us to restructure things.
Yeah, that sounds good. So is that an action for everybody to populate that list, or can we?
I think everybody, if we say everybody, then nobody will do it.
Yeah.
Put it on the notes doc for action items for at least you and me and Dan to go through the existing docs. Let's generate a list of what we think those docs that we own are. I bet we'll be surprised. And I'll take the action to invite some of our docs people to the next meeting in January. And
Great.
Anybody who feels like they've got some free time over the Christmas holiday, please take a look at our docs. You don't need to like edit them or take notes on them. Just take a look at them, familiarize yourself with what's in them, and start to think about how we can do better. Okay.
Tried to capture all that in the agenda doc, Tim.
Great.
So
Cool. So shall we move on to the next thing yet now?
sure.
So next on the list was Kube Proxy. I'm wondering if we should, before getting into some of these more technical ones, just jump to the 2017 planning doc and bring people's awareness to that. So third from the bottom, I put a bullet, 2017 planning, where I'm hoping we can start to flesh out a plan for what 2017 is going to look like. And I've laid this out with a high-level goals section where I've tried to capture, to start, just 3 kind of high-level things to improve, those being user experience, testing, and finishing existing features. That's just what I started with, but no reason to say there's not more or less that we can be focusing on. But I think kind of in a similar vein, as we move into the new year, we want to turn this doc into a kind of more detailed plan, specifically by starting to break it down into either quarters or release cycles.
Well, just adding an item here based on my email earlier, IPv6 ought to show up on the 2017 plan somewhere.
Yeah, we should have a section for new features. I mean, I know we want to focus on a lot of these things over 2017 that are currently in the doc, but
2017 is a long time, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
we're talking about stabilization and stuff, but that's for the first quarter of 2017.
So yeah, I think IPv6, we probably also want to talk about network objects there.
Yes.
And I guess that implies quite a few different things, which would be multiple pod IP addresses, potentially. That's related, but not the same thing as multiple networks.
I think these things are all in bounds for 2017. I think it's good to enumerate them all, and then we can try to rough sort them. I love planning, but if we think that we're going to be accurate beyond a few months with this project, we're probably deluded.
Yeah, I agree. On that list, there's one thing that surprised me. This business about empty list versus nil. I thought we'd already discussed that and decided.
Well, we discussed it, but then we went off and tried to actually implement it properly, and we found a bunch of options. And so I would like to make that a point for discussion today, that we make a final decision on that. Dan Winship, are you here?
Yes.
All right, cool. I would like to discuss the details of it. We can give a quick update on the experimentation that we've been doing, and then we can make a decision as to what we want to make the final decision be.
Great. Yeah, I think we should. That's overdue. We should get that down ASAP.
I think that's really the only outstanding thing that we need for network policy before we can propose to move it to GA, honestly. We might want to talk about CIDRs for ingress.
And egress, yeah.
Well,
I think that we decided evolution, right? I think we should be able to move what we've got to GA since we've got a design that evolves.
That's my feeling too. And so I would like to say we keep the existing design. We just clarify this one semantic point, and we move to GA in 1.6. Take it off the backlog.
Right, but we do want to get onto those other topics, but we can add them without. We can add them after GA.
Right.
So I added an item to our agenda for network policy, empty array versus nil. Just so we don't forget it.
Okay.
But is there any other reaction or suggestions or whatever for the planning doc Casey created besides new features?
I think it's a good doc. I don't think when I was reading it over this afternoon, I don't think I was thinking of it in the entirety of 2017. I was really thinking of it in sort of the short to medium term. I'm going to take another look at it with my eye towards all the crazy crap we want to get done in 2017.
Yeah, I mean, I know for myself personally, I am going to be working on some of these new features in the first half of 2017. So I'm certainly going to be trying to do a lot of that work upstream in Kubernetes first, or at least preparing the way for that. So I think, at least some of this stuff's relevant, and I'm sure the others in this call are working on stuff like this too.
So I have a quick question.
Can you speak up, please?
This is Sukhdev Kapoor. I'm new to the party. I'm trying to sort of understand things. So one of the things, when I'm looking at your 2017 plan, one of the questions I wrote there was multi-tenancy support. So can we potentially discuss that or include that as a part of 2017 charter?
Yeah, we've been talking about multi-tenancy for, probably over a year in this group, almost now. And I think some of that will get covered under multiple networks, although multi-tenancy is not quite the same thing.
Correct.
But
Yeah, actually, if I could add, I've been looking out for multi-tenancy issues, and a couple things on the roadmap could foul up the ability that we already have for multi-tenancy. Right now, Kubernetes does let you kind of, from the outside in, impose multi-tenancy. And I want to keep that possible and not ruin it with some of the other work.
Okay, so I think multi-tenancy sounds like a valid topic in 2017. I know that here at Google we have at least one person and bringing on more to be thinking about multi-tenancy holistically, not just with respect to networking, but networking is, I think, the real seed topic for that.
So I work for Juniper as a part of Contrail. We're looking into that, so I would be more than happy to help out and participate going forward.
Great.
Okay, shall we move on? I think the next thing on the list was kubeproxy. There's been a bunch of mail going by on the mailing list on that.
Before we jump to kubeproxy, though, do we want to do the network policy thing just to make sure we get that figured out? Right. Kubeproxy might be a slightly longer, less directed discussion.
That's a good point.
Yep, works for me.
So we had decided sort of in the abstract API space that the difference in semantic between an empty list of allowed ports and a non-specified list of allowed ports was a correct and potentially useful semantic, and so we spec'd it that way. And then it turned out that the way Go's JSON unmarshaller and proto unmarshaller work is we actually erase that semantic difference, and we couldn't tell the difference between which ones. And so Clayton did some work to figure out how to make it work in protobuf, and we sort of demonstrated that it works, again, as a proof of concept. Then I tried to, of course, a bunch of tests failed to do this. So in order to fix the tests, I set out to convert all of our API machinery to no longer assume that nil and empty are the same thing with respect to a slice. And the pull request started off really small to make it basically work, except we ran into a million problems, which are specifically protobuf still gets some of the encodings wrong. And it's hard to make that assertion generically. So the case that blew up on us most readily was a map of string to slice of string. And there's no such thing as an optional map value in protobuf. And as it turns out, like not in protobuf in the native format and not in the protobuf rendering for C++ and not in the protobuf rendering for other languages. So that gets to be challenging. Now, Clayton, who's not here, I think, but Clayton sort of argued, well, we can fix this, and the only language we really care about is Go, but I'm not really buying that. So the alternative, which Dan Winship implemented in a pull request or in a gist or something that I have open somewhere, was to take that slice and wrap it in a pointer to a structure. And so now it's very clear when a field comes through the API, whether the user specified it. It means the API is a little more chatty. You have one extra level of nesting, but it's very unambiguous when you intended to specify something that was empty versus when you didn't specify. So that actually sounds all right.
And it also looks a little bit more like the label selector case where.
Yes.
There.
So it looks okay to me. It is language agnostic, so it should render correctly in every language. The problem, of course, is it still actually sort of breaks when you get down to maps. Because, again, there's no such thing as a non-specified map value. So if we had, I don't think we have this case yet, but if we had a case of a map of string to port list, we would still not be able to tell if the user had not specified the port list or not. I'm not sure I'm worried about that, but I thought it was humorous that we have reduced it to a previously unsolved problem. So we have now, I think, a choice. And the choice is we can wrap those slices in our API with the struct and keep the semantic difference, or we can just abandon the semantic difference and say, you know what, empty and nil are the same thing in Kubernetes all over the API, and we're just going to not care.
So when you talk about in the API, you're talking about in the Go rendering or in the JSON?
Well, we would be making the assertion that the Kubernetes API does not make that distinction, that in no place do we care the difference between an empty slice and null.
Now I'm back on the other alternative where we do keep the distinction. And you proposed that in the API we would wrap this potential optional slice in a struct and make a pointer to it so that it could be optional. And you said that's something we would do in the API. I guess you're talking about the Go rendering, not in the JSON.
Yes.
It would be visible in the JSON as well, though.
That was my question. Are we talking about changing the JSON as well?
Yes.
Yep.
So it would change the API.
Yes. So the downside of this is that anybody who's got implementations today would have to adapt to this change.
Yeah, since it's alpha, that doesn't bother me too much.
It's not alpha, it's beta.
Oh, it's beta? Oh, God.
And to be clear, you mean that people with existing network policy implementations would have to adapt, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we can make it so that the API machinery converts between alpha and beta. That's easy enough. We need to know that anybody who's got an implementation who's reading V1 would be aware of this change and would invest it.
It just means any implementation needs to support two APIs, right?
Right. I mean, it's not atypical. Like, we do this a lot where we change something in a subtle way between beta and GA, and implementations just have to know that if they're reading a V1 object, that their code will not compile, hopefully, if they were accessing a field wrongly, right? Unless you're using Python, in which case, good luck.
Is there a way we can ensure that it doesn't compile if they do that?
See previous statement on Python. I don't think so. I mean, we can make sure that it doesn't compile for static languages that understand the difference between a pointer to a struct and a slice or an array. But I don't think that we can enforce that on every language. It's just going to have to be part of the release notes, right? Network policy moves to GA. Here are the deltas. If you have a client, then you have to be aware of these changes. But I think it can be automatically compatible at the server side.
It kind of seems like you're trying to convince yourself that we should do this, Tim.
No, I'm just trying to put out all the facts about what the machinery is capable of. I'm really, truly ambivalent about this one. I don't think the semantic is that useful, but I also feel like giving up is sad.
Right. So that was the other issue is that the semantic that we would be losing is the ability to create a network policy object that doesn't actually allow any additional traffic, which is equivalent to just not creating the network policy object.
So the thing that makes me argue for the semantic we chose is an argument of uniformity, right? If you erase the difference, then you and treat of whichever one we're probably thinking of, it becomes irregular, right? And so my concern is not so much with humans writing these things, but with programs writing these things, right? Based on other stuff. So I like to be able to, one man's app is another man's platform, right? And so I'm thinking about our next layer up developers who want to be able to generate these things according to simple uniform semantics and not worry about the irregularity due to what the API machinery can or cannot do.
Yes, I hear that argument. The engineer in me says, I agree with you. The practical, lazy person in me says, yeah, I think we can get away without it. So I leave it to the consensus of the group. I don't actually have an implementation here, so I don't really have any skin in the game. I'm looking at the folks who are implementing it as to what you prefer to do most.
Just to be clear, if we did choose to wrap slices in the API, the only downside we can see there, aside from a slight amount of extra complexity, is that plugin writers would have to update. Is that correct?
Yeah, anybody who's writing an implementation of network policy would have to adapt to the V1 API.
Right.
Which they're going to have to do anyway, because they're going to have to change at least the API version when it goes to V1.
I mean, I'm not writing the OpenShift implementation, Dan Winship is, but to me it sounds like we probably just want to go with the slight API change and wrapping.
I actually vote for the no API change and get rid of the distinction.
I think I also slightly vote towards that, but it's, yeah, not super strong opinion either way.
I personally think we should change the API. Now is the best time. We can definitely not do it later on. It's just my personal opinion.
Now we've got a perfectly split decision. I need a fifth implementer. Somebody.
Well, note that my argument here is not about not based on the concerns of implementers of network policy, right? I'm thinking about implementers of other stuff.
I wish I had an opinion. I know we've implemented it, but I don't think any of my other guys are on the call today. They're the ones that would have an opinion. I just sort of shrug at this one. Less is better. Is if you want if you had to make me choose.
All right. How about Dan? You've already got most of this PR done, right?
Yeah, both ways. In fact, I think.
Did you write the conversion logic between them?
No.
Okay. Maybe it's worthwhile to try to flesh it out and actually get it to pass all the API round tripping. And like, I mean, maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but like, what if we made this the V1 PR? Like, this is the PR that moves it to GA and introduces the semantic change in the process. And then we can take any comments back to the PR and get, like Chris Marino, you've got people who aren't on the call, obviously, get a little bit wider attention to it. What I don't want to do, Dan, is waste a bunch of your time. So if maybe we can like pull off a really simple version of this, maybe without like, I don't think it's gonna be that complicated. Mostly it's like copying a directory.
Yeah, it shouldn't be.
What do you think, guys? Should we just try that?
I'm not quite sure what your proposal was in terms of
the proposal is make the API change as we move it from beta to GA. I mean, the door's open for 1.6 changes, so why not do it now?
Okay, that works for me.
And then we'll look at the API change, and if we decide that it's more onerous than we thought, or if the preponderance of other voices says don't change the semantics, then we'll just abandon the semantics and Mike will be grumpy.
Works for me.
That works for me.
Yeah, works.
All right, so Dan Winship, that one's on you?
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, I may start that tomorrow.
Cool, one less beta in the system.
Thank you.
So I tried to encapsulate all that in an action item for that in the agenda doc. Somebody please review that and make sure that what I wrote is accurate.
Okay. Next topic.
I think the next topic is either, either microservice proxies doc or kube proxy. Take your pick.
So I know Enrico's here.
Yes.
Do you want to do the microservices? Like, where are we with it? What do we need next? What's the next steps?
Okay, so the doc has been out for some weeks now. I got what I feel is a good amount of feedback. Just a couple days ago, I sent out an email which contains basically what I think are the next steps, and I actually started working on that. So if anybody sees something that doesn't look right or has other suggestions or anything else, please reach out to me. To be more concrete, like I'm for the moment I'm trying to work both on the per node and per pod versions. The way that I have sort of thought about how to make it happen are quite different. And so just to summarize, in the per node version, there will be something, a sort of clone of kubeproxy, which would listen for services and endpoints, and based on that, program IP tables in the network namespace of the host. And so that's actually where I started from. So that's like I just started, but that's what I was thinking would be like a reasonable next step.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Mike.
Is what kubeproxy does today?
I mean, it will be similar to what kubeproxy do, but it will be like a separate process. So the completely independent, at least as of now.
It will be programming different rules.
Yes.
So I want to raise the issue of the mistake that the thing that we didn't do early on with kubeproxy, which was we started in describing everything in the implementation, and we didn't really describe it in the abstract, like what is the sort of API that we're trying to construct. It might be worth thinking about if you can describe it in a way that doesn't include the details of IP tables, but says, like, what are we expecting the abstract node level service proxy to do? Okay, yes. I think the document has quite a bit of that, but it's phrased in a different context, so I can turn that in a sort of real design doc rather than right now it's more in the form of a proposal or like jotting down some ideas. So sure. I just want to call out to the big issues that I see with it, and they're not problems, but they're just things that we need to be aware of, is, the proposal as you've written it traps all traffic, right? And I've raised this concern with you separately, but I want people to look at it with that in their eyes.
Are you mostly concerned about the inbound traffic or the outbound traffic? If you look at it from the perspective of a pod.
I think I'm concerned about both. I'm just concerned about it feels like a very big hammer, and it might be correct, but I wonder what it's going to do to my ability to debug weirdo situations, right? Okay, yeah, so actually, yeah, so because if you look at it at the network level, we can really go as granular as we need. But I think that the main concern that you had brought up was that at least in the way it is formulated now, it doesn't really distinguish between service to service and pod to pod traffic. So it would also capture, for example, like traffic between pods that happen to belong to the same service. So, and say, do we actually want to do that? Is it any useful? Like, what do we get out of it? Why do that? So, yeah, that's right. I would like to see the trade-off considered. And I guess the other part that I don't know the answer to is whether we're proposing here like an implementation and no real specification, or are we trying to propose sort of a template that other implementations would follow? At least in my mind, this was more of a kind of next level prototyping. So basically have something that gets the job done and see if we encounter any unexpected issue, or if there is something that we forgot. So I do not expect to show up in a couple of weeks and say like, okay, this is what I have, it is done, I will dump it somewhere and move on to something else. So that's not what I had in mind. But beyond that, if there is we are still in time to take into account like different ways of achieving similar objectives, or consider different implementations. So the real work that has been done so far was mostly to actually go on a real cluster and try out these things and make sure that at least when you do it manually, the effects are what we expect.
This hasn't been tested for scalability, and it hasn't really been. So I think my feeling is that in order to get the next round of feedback, I have to have something that does in an automated way what I've been doing manually so far. And this is really what I see this experiment, where I see this experiment going.
So I think that one of the next steps we'll want to look at is how does this work with other network plugins, or does it, or where does it fall down? If I'm running Calico or Weave or Contiv or one of these other plugins that are not the default KubeNet plugins, does it work? Do we need alternate implementations of this idea for different network plugins? Like where's the coupling?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Okay.
Along that lines, let me also point out, I have to apologize. I got distracted or somehow missed it. I didn't comment on this yet. But one big comment I'll say, remembering multi-tenancy, putting up a proxy per node runs into the same grief that the kube proxy runs in today for multi-tenancy, which is that the nodes are not dedicated to a given tenant.
Yep, and that was covered somewhat in the doc. Mike, you should please take a look at the doc. It's a very interesting trade-off discussion.
Yes, I'll try to remember to do that.
Cool.
Okay, so just to address also the second part, which is per pod. In that case, the situation is quite different. Again, based on what I have been experimenting with, I believe that we can do what we want just by having a few IP tables rules within the pod network namespace. So at this point, but in this case, the question becomes, how do we inject the proxy container in the pod, and how do we program the IP tables rules? So for that, the thing that seems to make more sense to me is to use to have an admission control plugin that does this job, possibly in a generalized way, so that it ends up being useful not just for this use case but for more. And so along that lines, what I've been experimenting with is to have basically a init plugin which comes up before init container that comes up before the application and the proxy container. We just programs on the IP tables and then exits. And then, and it also has to run with the CapNet admin. So, and then after that, the proxy container, the application container come up, the network namespace has been already programmed to do the routing the right way. And so from that point on, we don't need to make any more change. So we don't need any external component, at least for what I've seen now. This is also something that would be worth prototyping, meaning trying to automate, trying to have an admission controller that actually does this thing. But I mean, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that it seemed to be a little bit higher risk, I had planned to start from the per node case. If anybody wants to help, or if anybody has reasons why we should maybe work on the per pod case first, I'll be happy to hear them and adjust. Eventually, I think that at least at the beginning, they are both important, and we want to have both going. There is an extra problem on the per node case, which I haven't really looked into, but Brian has been looking into, and it is that it may be useful or even required to make sure that we preserve the IP address of the source IP address of the traffic. So, and that will be doable if the proxy works in fully transparent mode. So, you want to comment on that, Brian? I saw you sent an email today.
Yeah, so I have been doing some prototyping manually myself. I've got a proxy that works in full transparent mode. There's some quirks using some pretty hairy IP tables rules to make it work. I'm also curious if, if there's any use cases other than, so I'm just doing the outbound case. The inbound case, I haven't thought through that yet, and I'm not sure how that plays into some of the other solutions.
Yeah. So my sense is that it's much more important for the outbound case rather than for the inbound, but again, if anybody else knows reasons why it's important that when packets hit the pods, they preserve the source IP, please let us know, and we'll definitely take that into.
Given as much heat as we've taken for source IP stuff, I tend to believe it's pretty important. I waved it away early on in Kubernetes, and I got beat up pretty hard. So,
well, one of the big reasons why we want to preserve the source IP is for network policy, because a lot of the implementations probably need the source IP for for pod-to-pod traffic, right?
Okay, for pod-to-pod as well. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you have one pod that's going to talk to a service, and then it has to go through the proxy to talk to the service, and then it needs the network policy enforcement mechanism needs the source IP in most implementations right now to be able to figure that out.
So what he's trying to say is it's not just for pod-to-pod traffic; it's for pod-to-service traffic.
Yeah, it's basically for all traffic going on, because for the outbound we already knew that we need it. So this covers the remaining cases. So I guess the proxy should really be fully transparent in both directions to sort of make everybody happy at this point.
Okay.
Well, Enrico, you asked if anybody cares. For the reason I just said, I'm more interested in the per pod than the per node.
Okay, that's also useful information, because we started off thinking that the per pod would be the preferred solution for a bunch of reasons, and then after we socialized it, we discovered a bunch of reasons why the per node is also important. So this kind of feedback is also useful. It helps in directing our efforts, because we also have limited resources, so we need to prioritize things. So thank you.
Cool. So we've got about 15 minutes left. Are there any more questions or anything more we want to say on microservice proxies before moving on? Take that as a no. So I think the next thing we should probably talk about would be host port support and CNI, because I think that will be quicker than the kube proxy discussion. So there's a question was asked, what's the status of this? Who is doing what?
Yep. I mean, at least from my side, I'm trying to work on all the pieces on the CNI side. And there's a couple of PRs in flight. I've talked about them for a long time now. And at least in the model that I was going for, these PRs would be necessary to make host ports work with CNI in a way that is not Kubernetes specific. So I'm focusing more on the CNI side of things at this point. And then after that, I was going to go with the Kubernetes side, but it looks like somebody is looking at that already.
Yes, I saw your PRs, so I still haven't got a chance to leave a comment. I'm going to do it today. So is Tao on the line? Because he's the owner for the original GitHub issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I wanted to, because on our end, our CRI testing, there's a bunch of test cases failing because the CRI currently doesn't support host port. So I wanted to enable it, at least for the CRI testing to get going, and then prevent further disruption to the current CRI implementation. If nobody is taking on the work on the Kubernetes side, I will start work on the Kubernetes side, and then basically adjust the current interface from a complete sync of all the host ports to add and delete model like the CNI one. So that when the CNI plugin is complete and ready, then we can swap to that.
Okay. Good to know. And we can chat on the mailing list during the issue as well.
All right.
Sync up too, so.
So nobody's currently working on a host port CNI plugin on this call, right?
I have. I've started doing that, and what I was going to do there was a small daemon that ran that was spawned on the node the first time any plugin wanted to use host ports, and then that daemon would kind of take the place of the code that's currently in kubelet for opening the host ports and keeping those reservations. Okay. So I don't have anything to post in a PR yet because it requires some of the other PRs in the CNI repo I've been working on, but I'm happy to sit down and talk with you a little bit more about that, or write up on the list what I was planning to do there.
All right, sounds good.
Q1 objective, right?
Yes.
Yep.
You're right.
I wanted to get in as soon as possible.
All right, easy one. Next topic.
Next topic, yeah. Chris, was there any more you wanted to say on IPv6?
Or Thomas, if you're on.
Yeah. So IPv6 is obviously a very broad topic. I sort of volunteered to capture and document the scope of what IPv6 support actually means. I mean, there's the control plane and there's data plane, just as two very separate and distinct buckets. And again, I can't commit to actually devoting development resources to this just yet, but I think it's something I'd like to understand, and the people we're working with would like to understand a little bit more specifically about, rollout and capability. So I am volunteering to maybe take the first stab at a document capturing those items.
Okay. There was some discussion of this last week or the week before after reInvent on Twitter. Joe Beta and a couple other people were agreeing that we should get together to talk about the meaning of IPv6 in Kubernetes. I think you've got the right of it, that there's a number of topics to figure out, and they're largely not tied to each other, so we can actually move forward in many different directions. I think we do have willing people who want to help, especially in the context of AWS now. So we should try to engage those people.
Yeah, and if OpenStack is any indication of how deep these tentacles extend, I think this could be a very long effort.
Can we try and make this practical? Because I think we're actually not that far off, at least like to get at least partial support in. Given that we have prototype working, what seems logical next step to actually get stuff into Kubernetes itself is, first of all, ability for a pod to expose both v6 and v4. That's something that we can discuss right now. For example, whether we should bind that to multiple network support, or whether we can solve that separately without finding consensus on the multiple networks per pod. And then the other one is services. We did implement it with BPF so far, and we would be happy to push that into kubeproxy. But we also understand that like extension of the existing kubeproxy IP tables rules with IPv6 support would be needed as well, which is we haven't done that yet. But we would be happy to push our BPF stuff into kubeproxy if there's interest. That will support full IPv6.
And who was speaking there? Was that Thomas?
Yeah, this is Thomas.
I didn't see your icon flash here. So yeah, I'm sure you're very familiar with the issues, Thomas. So I certainly would love to see some of those that low-hanging fruit show up. So I mean, I'm anxious to see that.
So I think there were two issues really there, Thomas. One is, how can we just allow an interface to have both v4 and v6 addresses, which I think is going to require some amount of just plumbing.
Yeah.
And the second part is BPF in kubeproxy, which I'm afraid we're going to run out of time to talk about today. But I mean, everything I've seen about the BPF stuff looks like panacea, frankly. So I'm still waiting for the but. It looks fantastic. I guess the but it's not ready yet. But it's in such new kernels that nobody has it yet.
Yeah. So the but is like recent kernel, like it's 4.8, 4.9 that you need. That's the but. There's no way around it. This could be Well, basically the kube proxy could figure out whether support is available, and if not, it will fall back into an existing IP table solution, for example.
Sure, and that's what we did with the transition from user space to IP tables, right? Is we checked to see if IP tables was present and allowed, and if it was, then we use that. So we can totally do the same trick. I think BPF is the most promising technology we've seen for like the kube proxy that we actually want. So I would love to see that.
Yeah. So what would you suggest as next steps? Should we open a pull request and just get started? Should we try and spec something? Should we work on pod addressing first? What do you think are the right next steps?
Well, with respect to V4, because I think we could. The answer is different. Like, I see no reason not to start with a proposal for using BPF in V4 mode in kube proxy. And then there's a second proposal of what do we do about V6? And BPF support V6 already.
Yeah, we don't really make a difference between V4 and V6, so that would be fine. Like the V6 specific part would be minor from our side.
Okay. Yeah, as long as they're not coupled together, right? Because I just don't want people to be worried about, oh, well, I have to use V6 to use BPF, right?
Oh, yeah. You can choose to not compile that stuff in, so you can run V4 only mode. That's no problem. We can also just merge the V4 parts first. That's no problem either.
So I would start with a proposal that just said, this is how BPF works, this is what it's capable of achieving, and this is how we want to implement it in kube proxy. And everybody will largely nod their heads at it, and then we can go straight to implementation.
Cool. All right. Sounds good.
I think it'll be uncontentious, and the proposal is more for like information to catch the rest of us up to speed on what it's capable of doing.
Yep. So on the kubelet side and the API side, the only concern I'd have there is that IP addresses are sort of tied to multiple networks. So, I mean, we could do two things. We could add additional fields of kind of like, a primary IPv6 address like we currently have for IPv4. And we could do that and then add multiple network support later. So that might be one path forward, but I feel like we should really think hard about how we want the IP
like a V6 working group together. And to really, I'm greedy here, so I want to see the BPF stuff sooner in purely non-V6 mode. Like, I'd like to decouple those. But I think it's worthwhile getting a V6 working group together of people who actually know which end is up with respect to V6, and to make some recommendations about what the right API changes are. Because I honestly do not know what the answer is.
I agree, Tim. I think that would be a good thing to get going, maybe in early next year.
So Tim, what I'll do is, since I volunteered to put capture some of this in a doc, I'll solicit volunteers to be part of that working group.
That sounds great.
Hey, Chris, Danian Hansen here at Cisco. I've got myself and 2 or 3 other folks within Cisco that are new to the SIG network that we have our eye on V6 and would like to help champion and support and contribute to that effort.
You got it.
Awesome. So we have 5 minutes left. Is that enough time for another topic, or do we just adjourn?
I think we just adjourn, would be my opinion.
Well, if you have 5 minutes left, I have a question for Dan. You have been measuring the latency, the delay, or reconfiguring thousands of IP tables. What is the actual requirement use case driving this? Is it because you're introducing delay to your services, or do you care about latency of reconfiguration? What's driving this?
So it's CPU usage on machines, and we've also seen processes like the actual kube proxy process, or at least in the OpenShift case, because we build the proxy into OpenShift, the node process gets essentially halted in some cases by the kernel. So it's basically just a performance issue. But it's not really
not like you're adding 10,000 services every couple of seconds. You're adding them on the fly, like as you go along, right?
Yeah, we do expect probably a bunch of service churn, but I don't think at this point we would expect 10,000 services to change every couple of seconds. No, it would be, eventually you add, 5, 10 services every, a couple of seconds, maybe you would get up to, 10,000 or more services at some point. But the churn would certainly not be that great. But of course, the problem here is that, even if you add a couple of services every 10 seconds, you have to rewrite all of the IP tables rules, which, at this point we have between 4 and 8 IP tables rules per service. So that gets to be quite significant. So,
okay.
Can I propose then, if we're looking at 1.6 as a stabilization release, that we make this actually like a good topic for that? Like, we're out of time today, but let's define what we think the important metric and goal here is. Maybe it's measured in terms of CPU usage of kube proxy over a 1 second window or something like that. And then we can focus on making sure that we've got a test that proves that there is a problem that we can get checked in, and then we can work on the various solutions to solving it.
I mean, it seems like a test that proves the problem is a little bit hard to come by unless you have specific hardware, and we probably couldn't do that test on GCE because you don't see that problem on GCE due to the older kernel version, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure that we don't. There's a million things that could have gone wrong in the manual testing that I did. And I think it's worthwhile you're not the only people who've reported this. So if this is a real problem, we should really try to spend some energy to reproduce it. We're going to have some new people come online in Q1. So, these might be good starter projects for people, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, that said, it does seem to me that most of the people who have found issues with this are either using Fedora or Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Or something like that. I mean, the people who have replied are usually coming out of OpenShift land, which is where we've seen a lot of it.
Well, that just helps us narrow the test field down, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that all of those people who are coming from OpenShift land are going to be running either very up-to-date kernels or kernels with a boatload of backports that essentially make the problem happen.
Well, I mean, our GCI image is a relatively new kernel. It was 4.6. Something like that.
Okay. That is quite new, and I'm pretty sure I did reproduce the problem on 4.6 in Fedora as well.
So we should definitely retry it. I mean, I'm loath to fix a performance problem without having a demonstrable use case.
Yeah. Okay. What do you mean by that?
I mean, I can never guarantee that it won't come back.
Oh, okay. True.
Right? Unless I have a regression test for it, I just have no idea. We're just shooting in the dark, right?
Yeah, and something on my to-do list is to collapse the endpoint and service updates before we even get to the point of syncing the IP tables rules based on our discussion last week, Tim.
Okay.
And so I was going to do a second PR for the IP tables stuff to do that. That was largely independent of the IP tables rules parsing PR.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's kind of attempting to do your multi-layered mitigation suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, I love fixing problems, but I want to convince myself that this doesn't unfix itself somehow. And
yeah,
don't spend the time we've got to capture it now. We'll just be back here again.
Yep.
All right. I guess with that, we're out of time. I wish everybody a happy holidays, and we'll see you all in early January, I guess. What day is our next meeting?
It is January 12th, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
January
12th.
Yes. All right, Jan 12. We will see you all then.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Holidays.
Bye.